Hi everyone. The impact of inflation and interest rates on Australian retail expenditure between 2022 and 2024 is examined in this presentation. I will apply the economic frameworks of inflation and monetary policy using data from the Reserve Bank of Australia and the Australian Bureau of Statistics. I will also show how businesses' analytic tools may be used to assess economic patterns and assist in company decision making. Rising borrowing rates and inflation have presented serious difficulties for Australian retailers in recent years. Inflation rose dramatically after the COVID-19 pandemic, hitting 7.8% in 2022. As a result, living expenses rose and consumers' purchasing power decreased. The Reserve Bank of Australia raised the cash rate in response to growing inflation. Although this lessened inflationary pressures, it also made borrowing more expensive for both individuals and companies. Consumer buying patterns shifted as a result, and many retailers saw slower sales growth. Using information from the Reserve Bank of Australia and the Australian Bureau of Statistics, this presentation examines the connection between retail expenditure growth, monetary policy, and inflation in Australia. The graph illustrates how inflation fell to 4.1% in 2023 and 2.4% in 2024, after reaching a peak of 7.8% in 2022. Inflation is the increase in the price of goods and services over time. Households have less purchasing power when inflation is strong because daily costs like housing, groceries, and petrol increase. Because consumers frequently cut back on discretionary spending and concentrate on necessities, this may have an impact on retail establishments. The decline in inflation between 2022 and 2024 indicates a significant easing of pricing pressures. This probably increased consumer confidence and purchasing power, which made the environment better suited to an increase in retail expenditure. The Reserve Bank of Australia's measures to affect inflation and economic activity are referred to as monetary policy. The graph illustrates how the cash rate rose from 3.1% in 2022 to 4.3% in 2023 and stayed there until 2024. In order to reduce inflationary pressures and promote economic stability, these increases were put into place. Higher interest rates increase borrowing costs. This frequently results in higher mortgage payments and lower disposable cash for individuals to spend. Consequently, there may be a decline in consumer demand, especially for luxury retail products and services. This illustrates the trade-off that policymakers must make. Short-term reductions in consumer spending and corporate growth may result from actions used to control inflation. This graph shows how monetary policy and inflation affected the growth of retail spending from 2022 to 2024. Growth in retail expenditure fell sharply from 7.5% in 2022 to just 0.8% in 2023. Higher interest rates and persistent pressure from rising living expenses corresponded with this. Retail firms suffered as a result of many consumers prioritizing necessities and cutting back on discretionary spending. But in 2024, the growth in retail expenditure rebounded to 4.6%. This implies that consumer confidence and purchasing power increased when inflation was reduced and interest rates were stabilized. These three graphs' relationship shows how monetary policy and inflation can have a direct impact on consumer behavior and retail sector performance. This demonstrates why, while making decisions about price, inventory, and marketing, retailers need to keep a careful eye on economic data. The data was analyzed using a number of Excel business analytic tools. To illustrate patterns in inflation, cash rates, and the growth of retail expenditure, charts were made. Key data such as the highest rate of inflation, the highest rate of cash, and the lowest growth in retail spending, and the average rate of inflation were then summarized in a KPI dashboard. Additionally, periods of better and worse economic performance were rapidly identified using conditional formatting. By converting unprocessed economic data into valuable business insights, these analytic tools facilitated the faster identification of patterns and supported evidence-based business decision-making. Overall, the analysis showed a strong correlation between retail spending, monetary policy, and inflation. The RBA raised interest rates in response to rising inflation, which in 2023 limited retail growth and decreased consumer expenditure. In 2024, consumer confidence increased and retail spending growth restored as inflation decreased. In conclusion, our research illustrated how business analytic tools may be utilized to examine real-world economic data and enhance company decision-making. The investigation determined how shifts in the overall economy affect consumer spending and retail businesses' performance by using the economic frameworks of inflation and monetary policy. One important piece of advice is for retailers to keep a careful eye on interest rate and inflation trends while developing their pricing, inventory, and marketing plans. Businesses can enhance long-term business performance and adapt more successfully to shifting economic situations by using data-driven decision-making. Thank you.